basically, my talk is really about the opportunities that the youth have on the continent. And I liked what I heard just as I was listening in, that these opportunities are well beyond individual borders. I mean, it's to look at Africa as one huge bulging market that is connecting. So if I have the next slide, please, I just would like to go through some kind of background issues around what really is the problem and the current economic position, and where, broadly speaking, where are the youth supposed to probably look at. Let me just look, maybe you have already shared some of these statistics, but if you go on to the next slide, the most important statistic to start with is that, if you look, next slide, please, is that of the 776 million persons of working age in Africa, an estimated 290 million of those are in a group called not employed, not in education, not in training. So ILO call that NEET, N-E-E-T, and that number by 2030 will have bulged to 375 million. So in this group, not employed, not in education, not in training altogether, 40% of this youth age of 20 to 24 years in East and Southern Africa is in this group. The rate for Zimbabwe is 29%, not because they have more formal employment, but simply because Zimbabwe just happens to have many more young people in the educational system, and that's why that number is low. The figures for NEET is worse for young women in the same age group, 68% in Ethiopia, can you imagine, all the way to 53% in Kenya. So it is a worrisome figure. Next slide, please. If we then go into why Africa has this dubious distinction of being the wealthiest, poorest continent. Amazing how wealthy the continent is. I mean, we have 40% of the world's gold, 90% of the world's chromium, 90% of platinum. I mean, huge deposits of cobalt, diamonds, platinum, uranium, massive amounts of natural gas, name it, copper, iron, bauxite, silver. Altogether, Africa has the biggest percentage, at least 50 of all the world's known precious minerals. And we also have still the largest amount of arable land available for further agricultural production. So the long and the short, that even though some of the continents are chipping away at our market share, China is now growing cocoa, although by and large, Africa is still the largest grower of cocoa, sugar, salt, timber, tropical fruits. And I always say about our wildlife, there is no continent by far anywhere close to Africa in terms of charismatic wildlife. Our wildlife is the most charismatic in the world by a long stretch. The lion, there's no equivalent of it. Not even the tiger is as charismatic as the lion. The elephants, rhinos, giraffe, buffaloes, leopard. I mean, this is the cradle of humankind and also has the most charismatic wildlife. The potential of all this is huge. Africa has got most developed human spirit in the world. We are the only people who have never really get to go out and try and harass other people in other continents. Not because we can't, but it was never part of the spirit, because this is the cradle of humankind. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the future, I have this big worry that we Africans are walking into economic greatness and we're not even aware of it, because even as we are not performing that well, our economies still have the potential of the fastest growth in the world. So the statistics I'm giving you here are showing that almost inevitable. Africa will be the largest economy by the second half of this century. But I've given you the statistics here, starting just slicing up the century today, although the data says 2019, just call that today, then by the middle of the century, 2050, and then by the end of the century, 2100s. At the bottom, I've given you two scenarios. One where Africa is growing at 3%, which is on average where we are now, a little lower actually. But you will see that even at the lowest growth rates, Africa will be inching up better than you would originally have thought. But if we were to grow at 6%, which actually is easy for two reasons. Number one, Africa has grown at 4 or 5% before without much manufacturing, just through export of raw materials alone. Can you imagine Africa only manufactures 1.5% of the global manufacturing output, 1.5, which is miserable. If we were to just double that up to 3%, which is quite easy to do, to be quite honest, even at 3% of the global manufacturing, we will already be growing at 6, 7, 8%. I can tell you that. And if Africa were to grow at 6%, which by the way is less than half the rate at which China grew for more than 20, 30 years. So even at mediocre rates of 6%, Africa will be the largest economy in the world by 2060 latest. Next slide, please. So you understand my worry that we sleepwalk into economic greatness. We're not even aware of it. And I'm telling you, I'll repeat, young people, you have to transform Africa's economy from primary production to manufacturing. All you need to do is to manufacture 3 to 5% of the world's output, and they're already a superpower by the middle of the century. The population projections already show that by the middle of the century, 1 in every 5 human beings will be African. By the end of this century, 2 in 5 human beings will be African. What that means is, whether we like it or not, again, the global culture, the way the world is going to run in future is going to be largely determined by Africans. Next slide, please.